Hello humans and welcome back to the Sikh Genocide 1984 series. This is part 2 of 5, which is the insights on arms, militancy, terrorism and media with respect to the Operation Blue Star. The Harmandir Sahib or the Golden Temple was built by the 5th Sikh Guru, Guru Arjan Dev Ji. It itself is a symbol of religious tolerance. The first brick was laid by Mian Mir, a Muslim. Hindus, Sikhs and Muslims worked together to build the Golden Temple. It has 4 doors, which symbolizes that anybody is welcome irrespective of their caste or creed. The free community kitchen or the langar feeds from 50,000 to 1 lakh people on special occasions. In June 1984, the government deployed an army troop of about 1 lakh to attack the Harmandir Sahib, the highest center of Sikh religious and political life, with a claim to flush out militants. This indeed is one of the black marks in the history of independent India. It may be history for some, but the wounds are still fresh for those who have experienced the brutality. Every Sikh either knows someone who experienced it or has himself or herself been through it. Attacking the holiest shrine of the Sikhs with sophisticated weapons and artillery like Vijayanta tanks is like attacking the Mecca of Muslims, Jagannath Devi of Hindus or the Vatican of Christians. The attack was justified by Indira Gandhi as a requirement to flush out militants. But I wonder how many of us have really questioned this and wondered if this was really true. After all, there are always 2 sides of a coin. Indira Gandhi was declared a savior by the nation and the Sikhs were seen as anti-nationals or terrorists. But on the other hand, we see Indira Gandhi's complicity with electoral corruption and her call for emergency with its grotesque consequences. But on the other side, a peace-loving minority community with a significant contribution to the independence of India, precisely by 71%, chose to fight back in the language of the oppressor, that is, by taking up arms. This alone should compel us to critically analyze and question what was projected and what really happened. What is published is what is in the hands of the dominant, in this case the government. The Sikhs were defamed. Back then there was no social media where individuals had a platform to express their own opinions or expose the whole facade like we see happening today. Fake news was believed more easily because all that was fed to the public was simply absorbed by them. After all, there was no other way of expressing a different opinion, and in case it was, the opinion was immediately censored, the person was defamed, banned or even lynched, which happens even today. Personally, I denounce any act of violence, but I'm also aware that I think and say so from a place of privilege. The privilege of being able to choose among options to retaliate it. The privilege of not going through that level of emotional, physical and psychological abuse, and the privilege of being brought up in a completely different environment. It's true that we don't concern ourselves with an issue unless we are personally affected by it. As a result of this, it's all too easy for us to judge someone without taking a second to rationalize why the person resorted to taking up arms to fight back. Not to initiate war, but to fight back, to defend, to save their threatened identity. Were they really terrorists or were they freedom fighters fighting for self-determination who chose to fight back in the language of the oppressor, that is taking up arms, because all means failed and push came to shove? Here I present to you some views for us to critically analyze with an eye of empathy, sensitivity, rationality and humanity, the objective of the insurgency in Punjab and the plight of the Sikh armed revolutionaries and civilians who have been dehumanized by the government and other fellow civilians. Sikhs are a product of their faith. As I mentioned in the previous part, among the tenets of Sikhism, a fundamental part of being Sikh is to fight injustice and oppression within the Sikh principles, and to fight for those who cannot defend themselves, even if it means sacrificing their life to save the other. Clearly not to attack the innocent or the weak, but to take up arms only in defense or protection. The kirpan worn by Sikhs is not a dagger, but it is one of the 5 holy articles of faith which symbolizes sovereignty and serves as a constant reminder for Sikhs to be proactive in case of an attack on oneself or another, thereby protecting the other person instead of being a passive viewer. The 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, had formed the Khalsa or the Pure Army of God on Vaisakhi Day in 1699. Khalas means pure. The Sikhs who have been initiated into the Khalsa are called Amritdhari Sikhs. Guru Gobind Singh Ji instructed the Sikhs to wear 5Ks or the Panch Kakars as part of their Khalsa uniform. Apart from the kirpan, Sikhs have to keep their unshorn hair wrapped in a turban. This is meant for a Sikh to stand out in a crowd so that people in trouble would know who to run to feel safe. The wooden comb or the kanga is to practice hygiene and to prevent the mattifying of hair, thus reminding Sikhs to fulfill their worldly duties while growing spiritually instead of resorting to renunciation. The kachera or cotton undergarments is to practice chastity, and the iron or steel bracelet is symbolic of the eternal connection with the Almighty and represents cuffs as attached to the Guru's commands. The Khalsa refrains from consuming alcohol, drugs or tobacco, and it maintains a strict discipline. Sikh Gurus walked the talk. The ninth Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, sacrificed his life to protect the religious freedom of Kashmiri Hindus who were being forced to convert to Islam by the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. A present-day example is from earlier this year when Manjeet Singh, a 29-year-old Sikh man, used his turban, a sacred article of faith, to rescue 3 children who were drowning in the Kings River in California and then jumped in to save them. Seeing this, the bystanders helped the children out of the river, but Manjeet Singh had drowned trying to save them. Forming the Khalsa army in 1699 was a need back then. There were tyrants who kept invading and oppressing innocent people, and the Sikhs had stepped up to this. They began training and fought battles in defense. Battles were not fought to conquer any land or treasure. Guru Gobind Singh Ji said in his Zafarnama to Aurangzeb, quote, "When all peaceful methods of resolution fail, it is righteous to wield the sword." Unquote. He also said, quote, "Evil is to be resisted and uprooted, but the sword is never to be struck in hatred or in anger or in the spirit of revenge." Unquote. The concept of Miri Piri was introduced by the 6th Guru, Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji, and since then all the Gurus carried 2 swords, one for Miri and the second for Piri, which stand for temporal and spiritual authority respectively. More important is the spiritual practice, and Sikhs have been told that their mind should be in a state of simran or meditative state even in the battlefield. This helps them operate from a feeling of protection of the oppressed and fighting the evil instead of operating from a feeling of vengeance, wrath or aggression. The weapon is not seen as a weapon per se, but it is seen as their mind warding off evil with grace. This is learned in the traditional shastar vidya or weapon knowledge practice. It is thus treated with utmost respect and discipline. Guru Gobind Singh Ji was called Sant Sipahi or Saint Soldier. He never struck the first arrow in a battle, he never struck an arrow on the back of an enemy, and he never struck an arrow on anyone who was running away. The arrow of Guru Gobind Singh Ji had 3 bands of gold so that the family of the enemy who had been struck with his arrow would be able to pay for a decent funeral and sustain themselves once he had died. During the battle, he told Bhai Kanhaiya to give water to the enemies because once the arrow struck them, he didn't see them as enemies anymore, but saw them simply as humans. This is appreciated in a scene in the movie Kesari, which is based on the Battle of Saragari, where 21 Sikhs defended the fort against 10,000 Afghans. Therefore, Guru Gobind Singh Ji righteously practiced his line, "Recognize the whole human race as one," which is also the motto of the non-profit organization called Khalsa Aid, run by Ravi Singh Khalsa. These examples of battle discipline practiced by the Gurus show us that there is an ethical code of conduct practiced when arms are taken up. Another beautiful example is that of Malerkotla, which is currently a Muslim-dominated district in Punjab where people of all religions live in harmony, setting the greatest example for all of us to learn from. In the 1700s, the Nawab of Sirhind, Wazir Khan, who was the opponent of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, captured his 2 youngest sons and ordered their execution even though they weren't involved in battle. Then the Nawab of Malerkotla intervened and denounced the execution of the innocent children. Even though the 2 children were bricked alive and killed, the Sikhs still bear his kindness in mind till date. Therefore, in the partition riots of 1947, the Sikhs of Malerkotla protected the Muslims even though the Sikhs were majority and people of either community were killing each other in other parts of the state on either side of the border. Even earlier this year, the Sikhs of Malerkotla joined their Muslim brothers and sisters in the anti-CAA NRC protest. Now let's talk about arms or weapons. When we see a person holding a weapon, our mind can work in two ways. If we see a police or army person holding a weapon, we tend to feel safe. We don't judge the person to be a criminal or a threat. That's because the law states that they are allowed to carry it and that they have to stick to a code in order to justify its use. But if someone who is not a police or army person holds a weapon, we feel threatened and we quickly judge the person to be a criminal, militant or terrorist. Our mind does not really comprehend the intention with which the person has taken up the weapon. That's because there's no law that backs civilians to be armed at all times for defense. Our mind makes associations therefore based on what is backed by the law and what isn't, instead of making associations based on the intention of use of the arms. Going by this, weapons are neutral, just like social media and money. It depends on how we use it. Therefore, the intention of using it makes a person a terrorist or a protector. The very same weapon which is used to terrorize and kill innocent people may be used in defense to kill a serial killer or a rapist. So to really understand who is using weapons unlawfully as a scare tactic, whether or not backed by the law, we need to reflect on our thoughts and the subconscious associations our mind makes. What I mean to say is, even if the law states that a police or army person can carry weapons, it does not mean that they will always use it in the right way, because they're human after all. Similarly, if a civilian holds a weapon, it does not necessarily mean that the person will use it in the wrong way, as again, they are humans with hearts. Sikhism as a faith stands out because of the fine balance between spirituality and the use of weapons or shastar. Sikhs are a martial establishment. But due to a lack of understanding and ignorance of what their articles of faith stand for, they have been targets of bullying, racism, state-sponsored genocides and hate crimes.